Today, we are going to dive into a very specific kind of loneliness. I'm not talking about the kind you feel when you're by yourself. No, this is the kind you feel when you're surrounded by people, even people you really, really love. We're going to look at why that happens and introduce a totally new way of thinking about it, a new framework for building connections that actually feel right. I mean, just let that sink in. Have you ever felt this? It is such a gut-wrenching feeling. You're doing all the things you're supposed to do, you're talking, you're laughing, sharing a meal, but deep down, something is just completely off. It's this disconnect that words can't quite touch. And right here, this gets to the absolute core of the problem. You're exchanging information, right? Facts, what you did today, stories about work, let's call that data. But that feeling, that electric, deep feeling of being truly seen and understood, that resonance is just not there. It's like you're broadcasting on a frequency, but nobody's radio is tuned in. So that brings us to our first section here, the lonely connection. It's such a paradox, isn't it? Being connected on paper, but feeling totally isolated underneath. Let's really pull this apart and see why it happens. This is the defense mechanism so many of us learn to use. You see the world in this stunning high definition, you know? You catch the little nuances, the patterns nobody else sees, the tiny shifts in emotion. But you've learned, probably the hard way, that sharing this 8K view of the world can just overwhelm people. So you start to downsample yourself. You compress your biggest thoughts, and in doing that, you end up hiding the most authentic parts of who you are. And this is a huge moment of clarity. This feeling, it's not a personal failure. It's a relational mismatch. Just that simple reframe is so incredibly powerful. It's not that there's something wrong with you. It's that there's a fundamental technical difference in how you and the other person are processing reality. And that leads us directly to the heart of this whole explainer, the neural reframe. This is where we completely flip the script on the story you might have been telling yourself for years about your relationships and, well, your place in the world. Look at this. This is so powerful because it replaces that voice of self-criticism with essentially a technical diagnosis. That old, painful story, I'm broken, I'm too much, I'm hard to love, it gets upgraded to a new truth. You're not broken, you're in a relational mismatch. You're not too much, you're a high-resolution sentinel. And you're not hard to love, you're suffering from neural distinct. This isn't just playing with words, it's a profound paradigm shift. And this just nails the core difference. For a lot of people, companionship is the goal. Just having someone there is enough. But for a high-resolution mind, the objective is completely different. You're not just looking for someone to hang out with. Your brain is on a hunt. It's actively searching for another mind that can meet yours at the same depth, a mind it can sync up with. Okay, let's get into the science because this is where it gets really cool. This isn't just a nice metaphor we're talking about. This is a real, measurable, biological thing that happens in our brains. This is absolutely fascinating. Scientists actually call it interbrain coupling. When you genuinely connect with someone, when you really click, your brainwaves literally start to mirror each other. They sync up. Key parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex for complex thought and the insula for empathy, they start firing in harmony. So that phrase, being on the same wavelength, yeah, it's literally true. We can even model this, which is kind of wild. Think of it like a formula. Resonance is the result of two things on top. Shared resolution, can you both see the world in that 8K detail? Times vulnerability. Are you actually willing to share that 8K data? But then the whole thing is divided by processing mismatch. And if that number on the bottom, the mismatch, is really high, well, the potential for resonance just plummets no matter how hard you try. This might be the single best metaphor for this entire experience. You are broadcasting this rich, complex, beautiful, high-definition movie of who you are. But if the receiver is on a dial-up connection, that signal just can't get through. You know that frustrating, endless buffering wheel on a slow video? That is the feeling of loneliness in a mismatched connection. So if we get the problem, what's the solution? This brings us to a whole new mission. It's not about trying harder to connect with everyone. It's about something called gating for resonance. It's about becoming, well, selective. And this is a tough one to swallow, but it is so necessary. Constantly trying to force someone to see your high-resolution world when they just aren't equipped for it, it's not a noble act. It's exhausting, it's a slow drain on your energy, and it leads to what some sources call relational inflammation. It's just not sustainable. So the whole mindset has to shift. You have to evolve from being a people pleaser, which almost always means hiding your depth, to becoming an architect of depth. And the question you ask yourself changes completely. It's no longer about external validation. Do they like me? It's about a technical evaluation. Can they even receive my signal? Okay, so this is where we get super practical. How do we actually do this? Well, the framework proposes what it calls a resonance protocol, a clear set of steps you can take to start calibrating your relationships. So, we're going to walk through these 4 simple steps. They are designed to help you test for, build, and, just as importantly, protect these resonant connections without totally burning yourself out in the process. All right, step 1 is the 8K lead-in. Instead of starting off with boring small talk, you offer just a small piece of your genuine, high-resolution perspective pretty early in a conversation. Think of it like a little ping, a frequency test. And the response? It tells you everything you need to know. Do they get curious and lean in, or do they just give you a blank stare? This one simple test can save you a world of wasted energy. Step 2 is the vulnerability audit. Look, resonance can't happen if you're only sharing the polished, sanitized, safe version of yourself. True synchrony needs the real stuff, the messy, complex, authentic data. Vulnerability, it turns out, is the bandwidth. It's what allows your 8K signal to actually be transmitted in the first place. Okay, and that leads into the next steps. Step 3 is about strategic distance. This isn't about being cruel or cutting people off entirely. It's about protecting your energy. Once you identify a big mismatch, you make a conscious choice to invest less of your precious 8K data there. It's just smart energy conservation. And finally, step 4, which is this incredible tool you see here, labeling the desync. This is a game changer. The next time you feel that pang of loneliness with someone, you stop that old internal story of, I'm not wanted. And instead, you reframe it objectively like a scientist. This is neural desync. The connection is mismatched. It immediately takes you out of a place of shame and into a place of neutral observation. And really, this is the question that this entire framework boils down to. It's a choice. The path of fitting in requires you to constantly dim your own light, to lower your own resolution. But the path of the architect, that demands that you honor your resolution and start building a life that can actually support it. Which brings us to our final empowering idea, fully embracing this new identity. You are the architect of your depth. It's about taking conscious, deliberate control over who you let into your high-resolution inner world. I mean, how powerful is that? Just let it land for a second. You cannot force a connection. You can't will someone into having the capacity to meet you where you live. Your job isn't to build the entire bridge by yourself. It's to find other people who showed up with their own supply of bricks ready to build with you. So let this be the big takeaway. You're not too much. You're not broken. You are a high-resolution mind in a world that is often, frankly, content with low fidelity. And your task is not to shrink. Your task is to become an architect, to design a life that honors your depth, and to finally find the synchrony that you not only crave, but truly deserve. You ever been in a room packed with people, maybe even friends, and felt totally and completely alone? Well, today we're going to dive into the neuroscience behind that exact feeling. And what's wild is it might not be about you at all, but about a kind of biological mismatch. I mean, think about this. You're sitting right there with someone you genuinely care about. Everything looks fine on the outside, but deep down there's this gulf, a sense of isolation that you just can't quite put your finger on. You see, this isn't about being physically by yourself. The idea here is something called a relational mismatch. It's that feeling when you're explaining something important, but you can just tell the other person is only catching the surface level details. The real emotional weight, the texture of it all, it's just not landing. You're transmitting, but they're not receiving. And if you felt this enough, you know what happens next, right? You start filtering yourself. You hold back those really complex thoughts, the nuanced observations you have, because you've learned that for a lot of people, it's just too much. So you dial yourself down to make them comfortable. But what if, and this is a huge what if you're not broken? What if you're not too intense or hard to connect with? The theory here is that you're experiencing a biological phenomenon, something called neural dysync. Think of it like a hardware issue, not a problem with your personality. Okay, so let's get into the science of it, because this is where things get really fascinating. What's actually going on in our brains when a connection does work? What does it actually mean to be on the same wavelength with someone? Get this. A real deep connection has a physical signature in the brain. It's called neural synchrony, and it's not a metaphor. The brain waves of two people who are truly connecting literally start to mirror each other. They fire in similar patterns at the same time. It's the biological basis for feeling truly seen. And it gets even cooler. This process is called interbrain coupling. When you're in that state of resonance, specific parts of your brain, like your prefrontal cortex, which handles all that complex thinking, and the insula, which is basically the hub for empathy, they actually link up with the same spots in the other person's brain. Your brains are literally coupling together. So if our brains are wired for this incredible dance, why does it fail so often? Why do we end up feeling that painful disconnect even when we're trying so hard to connect? Well, social neuroscience points to something called a resolution match. Just think about video quality. You might be communicating in brilliant, high-fidelity 8K. You're picking up on the tiniest shifts in emotion. You're seeing the big picture, the systemic layers of a conversation. But what if the person you're talking to is only processing in, say, 240p? They're just getting the basic facts, the surface-level stuff. That's a mismatch. When that high-resolution 8K signal you're sending out hits a low-resolution 240p receiver, your brain basically throws up a red flag. It sent out this rich, complex packet of information, expecting something similar back, and it didn't get it. It registers that as a predictive error. The connection it predicted, it failed. And this quote just nails the feeling, doesn't it? It's like you're trying to stream a beautiful 4K movie, but you're on an old dial-up modem. That frustrating, endless buffering, that spinning wheel, that feeling is what your brain interprets as loneliness. It's a technical problem. You can almost think about it with this resonance equation. True connection, or resonance, is a product of your shared resolution. Are you both seeing in 8K and your willingness to be vulnerable? But that processing mismatch on the bottom of the equation, if that number's too big, it can totally sink the whole thing, no matter how vulnerable you are. Which, of course, leaves you with this really painful question. What do? Do you just start broadcasting in 240p? Do you intentionally lower your own resolution, dim your own signal, just to feel a sense of connection and be loved? According to this framework, the answer is a hard no. The solution isn't to dumb yourself down, it's to completely change the game. To stop trying to fit in everywhere and instead start consciously architecting relationships that can actually handle your native frequency. This means you have to change the fundamental question you're asking yourself. You stop asking, do they like me? Because that just leads to people pleasing. And you start asking, can they actually see my signal? It shifts the goal from seeking approval to seeking genuine compatibility. Okay, so this sounds good in theory, but how do you actually do it? Let's walk through a kind of practical toolkit for the high-resolution mind, a way to find these connections without just burning out. So here's a 4-step protocol. First, the 8K lead-in. Early on, you share one of those deeper, more complex thoughts to kind of test the waters. Second, the vulnerability audit. You consciously decide to share your real data, not just the sanitized, safe version of yourself. Third, and this one's key, strategic distance. It's okay to keep those low-res interactions on the surface to protect your energy. And finally, label the desync. When you feel that disconnect, just name it in your head. Okay, this is just neural desync. It takes the personal sting out of it. And this quote just sums it all up, really. Stop trying to build bridges with people who don't have the bricks. It reframes the whole problem. It's not that you're a bad bridge builder. It might just be that the other person showed up to the construction site empty-handed. You can't force it. So, in the end, it really comes down to this choice. Are you going to keep trying to fit in, sanding down your edges and lowering your resolution just to be accepted? Or are you going to start being an architect of resonance, carefully, deliberately building the kind of deep, high-fidelity connections that your brain was actually made for?
Okay, let's get right into it. We're going to be talking about relationships, but probably not in the way you're used to thinking about them. For a minute, let's just forget about feelings. Today we're looking at connection as a technical achievement, almost like an act of engineering. And this is really for anyone out there who's ever felt just chronically and deeply misunderstood.
You know this feeling, right? This is where it all starts. You're with people you genuinely care about. Maybe you're at dinner, you're talking, but it's just not landing. It's like there's this invisible wall. You're sending out all this data, but there's just zero resonance. And you end up feeling completely and utterly alone, even in a room full of people.
But here's where things get really interesting. What if you're not broken? What if you're not too much or somehow hard to love? What if the problem is purely technical? Like trying to play a 4K Blu-ray on an old VCR. Just asking this one question, well, it can change absolutely everything.
So let's give this problem a name: relational mismatch. Here's what's happening. You are operating at what we're going to call 8K resolution. You're seeing all the nuance, the complexity, all the layers of life, and you're trying to connect with someone who can only process that information at, say, 240p. That connection, well, it's basically doomed to fail from the start.
Okay, so let's dig into the mechanics of this. We're moving away from all that self-blame and into a framework called neural dissync. The key here is that this isn't about your personality. It's about the fundamental frequency of your connection.
So it turns out there's a biological goal for any real connection, and it's this: neural synchrony. And this is a real thing. You can actually measure it. It's when the brain activity in two people, it literally starts to align, to mirror each other. Some scientists even call it interbrain coupling. And that is that incredible feeling of being perfectly, totally in sync with someone.
So why does this synchrony fail so often? Well, this slide just illustrates the core problem perfectly: resolution mismatch. Your 8K signal, all your intricate thoughts, your deep emotions, your complex observations, you send it out, but it hits a receiver that just doesn't have the hardware to process it. So that beautiful coupling, it fails.
And this is the perfect metaphor for that feeling. That loneliness you feel, it isn't because you're isolated. It's that constant, frustrating buffering you experience when your high-definition self is stuck trying to stream over a dial-up network. It's just exhausting. All right, so we've diagnosed the problem. Now, what's the solution? This is the big pivot, the huge reframe. We're moving away from that passive, people-pleasing mindset and stepping into an active, empowered one. You're about to become an architect.
And this is the crucial point. Love stops being this passive feeling you just hope to stumble upon. For the Sentinel, and that's the new identity we're talking about, the guardian of your own frequency, love is an architectural project. It's the deliberate, skillful construction of a shared sanctuary where two minds can finally meet at their highest possible resolution.
Let's just look at this side by side, okay? The old way was being a people pleaser, right? Hiding your depth, constantly lowering your own resolution just to be understood. The new way, you become the architect of depth. You don't hide, you build sanctuaries. And your new prime directive is gating for resonance, which really just means you stop compromising your signal and instead you start selectively granting access only to those who prove they can actually meet your frequency.
And this completely changes the most fundamental question you ask yourself. You stop worrying, do they like me? Which, let's be honest, is just a plea for external validation. And you start asking, can they see the signal? Which is a technical qualification. It's a total game changer.
And make no mistake, ignoring this has a real cost. Continuously trying to force a high-resolution connection with someone who isn't equipped for it, well, it's basically a form of self-harm. It just depletes your mental energy, your RAM, and leaves you in this constant state of what we can call relational inflammation.
Okay, so that's the new paradigm. Now, how do we actually put this into practice? Let's get to the toolkit. Let's see how this thing is built. We're going to use something called the resonance protocol.
So here they are, the 4 steps to start architecting your connections. This is your practical roadmap. First up, the 8K lead-in, then the vulnerability audit. Step 3 is strategic distance. And finally, number 4, labeling the desync.
Okay, let's break these down. The 8K lead-in. Think of this as your frequency test. Instead of saying, "This is a nice restaurant," you might say something like, "I'm fascinated by how the design of this place really encourages quiet conversation." It's a small bid for depth. You just see if they engage with that nuance or if they just say, "Yeah, it's nice." Next, the vulnerability audit. This is about sharing the real data of your inner world, not the safe, curated version. It's the difference between "work is fine" and "I'm feeling really conflicted about a project right now." True resonance demands real data. Then, strategic distance. Look, not everyone needs full access to your 8K signal. It is okay, in fact it's necessary, to keep some connections in the surface layer to protect your mental RAM. And finally, labeling the desync. In that moment of disconnection, you actively reframe your thoughts. "I'm unloved" becomes a technical assessment. Our resolutions are mismatched right now. This just removes the shame.
So where does all of this lead? Well, it leads to a really profound transformation in your identity, in your whole experience of the world. You basically evolve from a place of fragile isolation to one of empowered, selective strength. You move from what's called the orchid's isolation, that feeling of being this delicate, sensitive flower that can only thrive in these perfect, rare conditions, to the sentinel's selective symmetry. And the most important part is this, that shame you felt for being different, it just disappears. It's replaced by a calm, technical understanding of your own requirements for connection.
And this brings us to the final, critical takeaway. It's a simple idea, but it is so powerful. Stop wasting your energy trying to build these grand, beautiful bridges with people who show up to the construction site without any bricks. You're the architect now, and your sanctuary requires the right materials to be built.
Okay, let's just dive right into this. Have you ever been in a conversation, maybe even with people you really love, and just felt completely and utterly misunderstood? Well, today, we're going to unpack a really fascinating framework that's all about moving past just talking and into a state of real, authentic connection. It's about how to architect resonance. And this quote, wow, it just hits so hard because it's so true, right? You're there, you're physically present, you're sharing things, but deep down, something just feels off. There's a gap. And it's this cold, isolating feeling of being completely alone, even when you're surrounded by people. And here is the absolute core of the issue. It's not that you're failing to communicate. You're sharing the data, the facts, the stories, what you did today. The problem is you're not getting resonance. It really is like two musicians playing from completely different sheet music in the same room. The sounds are there, but there is absolutely no harmony. Now, believe it or not, there's actually a name for this experience. It's called a relational mismatch. This is what's happening when your mind sees the world in, let's say, stunning 8K detail, your thoughts, your feelings, all of it. But the person you're talking to, they just aren't equipped to process that level of information. It's not about you being too much. It's a fundamental mismatch in processing power. So this brings us to a super powerful way to reframe this whole thing. What if this feeling isn't some deep personal flaw? What if it's not proof that you're just, hard to get along with? What if it's just a technical issue, a phenomenon called neural dissync? Let's break that down. So, the biological goal when we connect with someone is this incredible thing called neural synchrony. And it is wild. When two people genuinely connect, their brainwaves literally start to mirror each other. They sync up. This inter-brain coupling is the physical, tangible basis for that amazing feeling of being seen and truly understood. And this slide just lays out the problem perfectly. Think about your mind operating in 8K resolution. You notice the tiny micro-textures in a conversation. You process these huge systemic layers of meaning. But you might be trying to connect with someone who's processing in 240p. They just see the surface level stuff, they're happy with just simple company, while you are starving for depth. You just can't get that neural synchrony across such a huge resolution gap. This metaphor, it just nails it, doesn't it? Your brain is trying to send this rich, complex, beautiful, high-def signal, but it's hitting a receiver that's basically on dial-up. And that feeling of endless buffering, that constant loading screen where the information just isn't getting through, that is the feeling of loneliness. So what do we do? What's the solution here? We have to completely change our approach. We have to stop being the people pleaser who tries to dumb themselves down to fit in, and instead we become an active architect of depth, someone who intentionally and deliberately designs their connections. And that means we have to forget all the old, useless advice you've heard it, right? Oh, you just need to be more social, or you should lower your expectations. This is what the source material calls a dandelion platitude. It's like telling an orchid it just needs to be tougher, like a dandelion. It completely ignores your nature and it just forces you to shrink. So here's the new mandate, gating for resonance. This is a radical form of self-care. It's about accepting a really hard truth. Not everyone has the hardware to fully process or render who you really are. And that's okay. The goal isn't to connect with everybody. It's to find a very few who can actually receive your signal in all its high-resolution glory. Which, of course, brings us to the most practical and important question of all. How do we actually do this? How do we build these kinds of connections without completely exhausting ourselves by masking? By putting on a simplified face and pretending to be lower resolution than we are? Well, the answer is a system called the resonance protocol. You can think of it as a clear four-step calibration process designed specifically for the high-resolution mind to help you find and nurture that real, true synchrony. So here are the 4 steps. You've got the 8K lead-in, the vulnerability audit, something called strategic distance, and finally labeling the desync. Let's walk through each one. Okay, step 1 is the 8K lead-in. I love this. The idea is to just ditch the small talk. Early on in a conversation, share one of your genuine, high-resolution observations. This is not about trying to sound smart. It's a frequency test. If the other person leans in, if they get curious, you might have resonance. If they just look confused or brush it off, well, you've got a hardware mismatch. It's a simple diagnostic tool. All right, next up, the vulnerability audit. Real resonance can't be built on safe data. That polished, curated version of yourself you show to the world. A true connection demands the real data. Your 8K vulnerability, your complex anxieties, your wildest hopes. That is the goal that allows another person's mind to actually sync up with yours. Step 3 is all about managing your energy. It's called strategic distance. This means you have to recognize that some people and some relationships are just meant for low-resolution, surface-level interaction. And that's fine. Keep them there. This isn't about being mean or cold. It's about protecting your mental RAM for the deep, synchronous connections that are the ones that actually feed your soul. And finally, step 4. This one is a huge cognitive shift. The next time you're in a room and you feel that familiar ache of loneliness, I want you to consciously label what's happening. Instead of that inner voice saying, I'm unloved or I don't belong here, you reframe it objectively. You say to yourself, this is neural dissync. The connection here is mismatched. See how that shifts you from a place of shame to a place of simple observation? So when you put it all together, what's the big idea? It's this. You are not some passive victim in your relationships. You are the sentinel. You are the guardian of your own inner world, and you have the power to be the architect of your own connection. I really want you to let this next one sink in. Stop trying to build bridges with people who don't have the bricks. You cannot force resonance. You can't make someone have the capacity to meet you where you are. Your job is simply to find the people who already have the building materials. So, what's the final takeaway? Be the observer of your own life and of your connections. It's time to stop settling for that 240p buffering feeling. Your heart, your mind, your entire soul requires 8K resonance to feel truly, deeply seen. So don't just search for connection. Architect it.